Hey guys, this episode we're going to be talking about how to do inline editing with Hotwire and Turbo, specifically using Turbo frames. And this tutorial is actually written by Sean Doyle, who's done a lot of work on Turbo itself. He's also got this great repository of Thoughtbot Hotwire example template that has branches for lots of different features. We're going to work through all of these and see how they all work, because he's got a really great approach to try and use the features that are built into the browser already and implement these features without writing hardly any JavaScript, if any at all. So it really takes advantage of Hotwire, and we're going to dive into the inline editing example today. So this example, we want to be able to inline edit these these fields on our article by grabbing portions of this form and displaying them on this show page. So we're going to jump between these two and grab different fields and make them editable inline on this show page. So let's dive in. So what we're going to be using for this is a Turbo frame. So we'll start on the show page, and what we want to do is add a Turbo frame tag around the portions that we want to have editable. And instead of using the Turbo frame tag directly, which you can do, we're going to use the Turbo frame Rails helper, Turbo frame tag, and it takes an ID. And then we can give it a block and include any of the content we want inside of it. So the ID that we're going to have here, I'm going to make into a variable called frame ID. And that's going to be the DOM ID for the article. And then we're going to prefix that with basically the name of the field. So we're going to say name Turbo frame, and that's going to be the name field that we're going to look for inside of the edit page. So here we'll say frame ID, and we're going to grab the same stuff and put that inside of the edit page around the name fields. So here we will have the Turbo frame tag for these fields, and when we click on anything inside of here that links to the edit page, it will look for the exact same Turbo frame ID in the HTML in that and replace this frame with that one. So it works just like an iframe, where we have some content on the page and we're embedding another page into it. That's really how to think about the Turbo frames. So if we go here and we say link to edit name, and we go to the edit article path at article, this is going to link to that page. It's going to make a request with Turbo. It's going to see that it's inside of this Turbo frame. So it's going to grab the ID, then take the output of that edit page and look for the Turbo frame with the same ID in there and replace the contents. Now, if nothing's on that page, it's going to end up being empty because there was nothing there with that same Turbo frame ID. So now we have this edit name. We can click that, and we're going to see that the fields on the edit article are now showing here, which is awesome. So if we go to the edit page, we'll notice that this name should be on its own line, and we can change that by going into the edit and saying here class is contents, which will add basically the same thing as a style tag of display contents. And that CSS is coming from Tailwind CSS, so we have that, and we can add that back in here, and that's going to basically say the Turbo frame just is kind of ignored and doesn't change the layout of the page at all. It's mostly just the contents that we care about, and so that's how it's going to render and kind of ignore that change. So now we can edit our H1, and this is going to show our name field, but it's not inside of a form. We have no way to go back, and we need to make some adjustments here. So what we'll do is we will have a link to cancel, and this is going to link to the show page. And because it's in a Turbo frame, it's going to do the same thing going backwards. So it's going to include the H1 when we click on this, because it will go to the show, it will find the Turbo frame, and then it's going to see the H1 and the edit and put that back on the page. So now we can edit and we can cancel, and we can jump between those as much as we want, and it's just going to make requests to the server, grabbing those HTML snippets for us, and that works great. And it's reusable. We haven't made any modifications to the edit page except for that cancel link, which we'll hide later on. So this is good. and gets us to the point where we need to actually have a form around our fields, because we're inserting the fields here, but they're outside of a form and there's no way to actually submit this to the Rails server. So what we're going to end up doing is creating a form on the page here and having that submit to the server. So what we'll end up doing is we're going to go to our edit first, and we want to introduce a form.button tag. So we have a submit button, and we can say save name or just save or whatever we want, and that's going to give us a button here. Then we can also cancel, but we want this button to actually do something. Right now it's not going to do anything because it's outside of a form. It's inside of a frame, but not a form. We need the form to be able to submit to the server. So if we hop into our show, we can go and wrap our turbo frame tag with a form with model at article, and we want to say the same class as contents here as well, and we'll add a form builder around that. We don't really actually even need it here because the form fields are being generated by the other view, so we can actually even leave that out, which is cool. So you can include it if you need it or whatever. I'm used to using that, so I'm going to keep it. But now we will have a form that when we click save will actually submit. But let's make an adjustment here. Say categories is all caps. What we really want with an inline edit is this not to refresh the page, just to update that section of the page in the turbo frame. But if we click save name right now, it's going to refresh the entire page. And that is because when you submit a form, that's what it normally does. But if you specify on the form a data turbo frame attribute, you can specify the turbo frame ID, and this is going to then scope the redirect and rendering of the show page to that frame, and then it's going to update that frame on the page. So we have the form now saying, hey, when you finish rendering, let's look for that frame and then update it on the page. So here I went and capitalized categories so we can see that there's an edit on the page that we want to make sure persists. So if we edit the name of this, say Hello World 2, click save name, categories is still all caps, and it has only updated that portion of the page inside the turbo frame that matches. So that is good. We are on the right track. But you'll notice that now our frame changes here that were needed for the other page are messing with our form. So we want to be able to modify this with some CSS so that these fields can be here, but we can hide them when you're on the edit page. So we're going to use a little bit of CSS to do that pretty easily by basically just nesting your style sheets. So we have the edit style, and we can hide those things inside of it if these elements are inside of the edit page, and normally make them visible on any other page. So let's do that next. So let's think about this as we go. We basically want the save and link to cancel to be display none by default. So when they are on the edit page, they're always hidden. In general, they're always hidden, but inside of the inline edit, when this frame renders, we want it to actually be displayed. So what we can do is write a little bit of CSS, go into here, application.css, and we can add inline action to display none by default. But if you were inside inline edit and you have an inline action, then it can be display initial. So this is going to make it so that if we tag these with that class and say class inline edit or inline action, sorry, we can do the same thing here. Class is inline action. We will then see that these are hidden. So we can go here, or CSS reloaded, and those are now invisible, but they're also going to be invisible here until we add the inline edit to our show page. So we can do that here on our page anywhere we need to, probably on the turbo frame, but you could probably also do this on the form as well. We'll do that here, and we'll say class is inline edit because that's where it is most relevant. and we are back to having our fields visible, but not on the edit article view. So with a little bit of CSS, we have a nice way of hiding and showing those automatically on the relevant pages. And that's pretty common for any TurboFrame stuff where you want to be able to have one view that you can go to directly if you want to edit everything. But if you want to inline edit pieces of them, then you're going to need something like this so that you can hide and show those actions as necessary. So now let's make this reusable so that we can have this work for the byline, the published date, the categories, and the content, because this is going to be really something that you're going to want for more than just the name most of the time. So let's go through and make this refactored. So we'll make an inline edit .html.erb template. We'll basically take the stuff that we have here with our frames and paste that in and start extracting it. Because we don't want this to be too specific to an article, we can make this a model. We can change any of those references to that. But in this case, we have our H1 and our article name and our edit link here. So we need to actually instead yield to the caller. So when we make a call to render this partial, we can give it a block. It will yield to that block and we can have it still render that article name. So what we'll end up with is something like this. We'll render inline edit and we will give it the model and we'll say @article, and we'll also need to give it that name of the field that we are editing, which we have up here as well. So we'll say this is the attribute or something like that. We can say attribute is name, and then we can give it a block, and that's where we can put in our contents here. And we can say the article name is an H1, and we don't need to actually include this link to because we can make that generic here as well. So what we'll end up with is we'll do a link to, and because we're going to make this a little bit more complex, we'll have an edit path in here. And this is going to be our model, and we'll do a block here. And we'll have the edit, and we'll generate the model.class.human attribute name for our attribute. And that's going to use the Rails helper human attribute name to basically capitalize that and render that correctly. So what we'll end up with is being able to delete this whole thing and just render our inline edit partial around that. We don't need our H1 in here anymore, so let's get rid of that. Now it looks exactly the same as it did before. We can edit, we can save our name, we can cancel, let's do that change, and voila. Everything is still working, but now we have this reusable partial that we can use, for example, on the byline. So if we go here and we say, let's do our model, but this is the byline, do, and voila. Now we have edit byline, and we just need to go into our form and add that TurboFrame there. So if we go into edit, we can have the TurboFrame ID around this, but as you can see, we're starting to duplicate this as well. So it would be great for us to have an inline fields partial as well. So we'll have an inline fields, if we spell it right, inline fields.html.erb, and we'll grab this one up here and paste it in as our template to work with. So we're going to change this from article to model. We'll change name to attribute, and then we'll have our contents. We're going to, instead of rendering the fields here, we'll yield, so you can customize the fields however you like. And our form button here will be similar, but we're going to do the same thing by making this a block where we can say save, and we will render out the form.object.class.human attribute name for our attribute, same as we did before, and we'll have cancel, and this will go to our form.object instead. And then we can also instead make this form.object here as well. And what that'll allow us to do is then say, get rid of this. We will render inline fields. Form is form, and then method or attribute rather is name, do. And then we'll have our form object. We don't need that stuff, and we can do our form fields however we like. So with this, we can then say our byline do, and we can edit our byline now. It's going to show our form fields. We can make any changes here. This is a byline. Save it. This is a byline. So all of that now works. And the extraction allows us to super easily add this for everything else. So we can say for our published on, move those in. Same thing works for our category IDs. Category IDs. We'll do an end here, and same thing for our content. So let's move these in, grab this. Move that in, end, and content. Then we can go to our show and apply the same inline edit to these as well. So we'll just paste this in around these and then modify those attributes to match. Let me close this so we can see that a little bit better. For our byline, we have our article, we have published on, we have our category IDs attribute, and this one is our content. And we'll go up here and add our end for each of these blocks so that we have that. We can save, refresh our page, and we should be able to edit the published on date. We can change that to yesterday, save the published on January 31st. We can edit our categories and add JavaScript, Rails, and Ruby. And now all of those are displayed, and we can edit our content as well. Make this bold, save the content, and there we go. So now we have this extremely reusable feature where we can inline edit anything on our page. We can just tell it what attributes. The form already is ready for those fields. So we're just swapping out the little pieces of content as we go, and it works really, really well. So we didn't write any JavaScript for this. All of that is done with turbo frames, and we can really easily wrap our heads around how these inline edits work because we're literally just pulling form fields and putting them on the page. Now we have all of these being rendered accordingly, and everything works like a charm. So this is a really great approach to using turbo frames in an advanced way to do inline editing so that you get the exact same nice form field layout from your edit page and can reuse it here as well. So your question might be now, why do we put the inline edit fields inside of our articles view folder when we might need this in another model? Well, we can just move that out to the application folder, and we'll move those into that. So instead of articles, we'll have this application, inline edit, and we'll move this over to application, inline fields. Save that, and as long as any of these are referencing the form in the fields, actually, the form object, we're not referencing any article specific stuff, and same for the inline edit partial, nothing except for this link here and the cancel link are actually, well, the cancel link's already done, but you could use the polymorphic URL for this instead. So if we change this, we can say edit polymorphic path to the model, which will look at the model, see that it's an article or it's a blog post or it's a forum thread or whatever, and it's going to generate the correct URL for that automatically based on the class name. So we can do the same thing for our fields, and we can say polymorphic path for the form object. That's what Rails does behind the scenes if you just directly pass in the form object, and that works great. So that allows us to, extract that in a way that is now reusable for anything on any model, and we can handle all of these independently. So that's super cool and a great example of using turbo frames to accomplish inline editing in a fairly advanced way. So this is great. Really enjoyed following this tutorial. Sean's doing a great job on these, and we're going to go through the next one pretty soon. So until then, I will talk to you guys later. Peace.